So when I first saw this story, I got to admit, I was skeptical. But I do my research when I bring you stories here on the channel, so I dug deeper. I thought it might have been one of those frivolous lawsuits like we've seen from McDonald's or Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts where somebody was burned on a hot cup of coffee and they wanted their payday. Well, I opened the story, and the first thing that popped up were pictures of the injuries that the young lady in this story we're going to talk about suffered. And they were bad. They were so bad, in fact, that I can't show you them on YouTube or I'd be demonetized. But not only that, not only was she burned, but it was due completely to the negligence of the British Air staff and flight attendants. So let's get into this story. I think you might agree with me. Either way, be sure and let me know down below. And what is just the latest in a series of serious hot liquid burning incidents on airlines, and later I'll get into some of those. But there is a new lawsuit recently filed against British Airways, which is facing a legal battle after the family of a 14-year-old girl filed a lawsuit against the carrier, seeking more than $750,000 in damages following an incident where a flight attendant spilled hot coffee on her lap during a flight from London to Miami on October 18, 2023. The girl, who was returning from a community service trip in Nairobi, suffered second-degree burns as a result of the incident, leaving her with permanent scars. And as I mentioned, these are serious burns indeed, scars that she will carry with her the rest of her life. The teenage girl, who has not been named due to her age, first flew from Kenya to London and connected onto British Airways flight BA207 on board an Airbus A380 Super Jumbo for the second leg of their long journey home. The victim was flying back home to Puerto Rico with her grandmother after a trip to Africa. Toward the end of the first meal service, a flight attendant asked whether the victim and her grandmother would like a cup of fresh coffee to finish their lunch. According to the 14-page complaint, the flight attendant decided to, well, there's no other way to describe it other than recklessly, place an empty cup on a tray that was directly above the victim's lap and began pouring the coffee into the cup from a large coffee pot. Now, why flight attendants are doing this, I don't know. Why are they pouring hot coffee above passengers? Yeah, I can't recall seeing that too often. If you have, let me know down below. However, fortunately, she managed to pour the coffee in this dangerous position without spilling any. But then the flight attendant offered them a stir stick and packs of sugar with their coffee. As the flight attendant placed the stir stick in the cup, that's right, she hit the stick with her hand and shockingly knocked the entire cup of scalding coffee into the young victim's lap. Well, the victim immediately started to scream and cry in pain as the hot liquid soaked through her clothing, causing extremely severe burns. However, the suit claims the reaction of the flight attendant and her coworkers was, quote, alarmingly inadequate. And the burns were quite severe, and as I said, I can't show them here, but you can find them on the internet, and after the video, I'd encourage you to go find them. Because if you're like me, after so many of these types of frivolous lawsuits, we can be a bit jaded as to the reasons and think they are just money grabs, but this is not one of those cases. This is really serious. The court documents say the girl felt neglected with no efforts made to address her injuries immediately after she was burned. The lawsuit claims that the flight attendant failed to offer any first aid, leaving the victim feeling completely abandoned and disregarded by the aircrew. When her grandmother took the victim to the bathroom to assess her injuries, she was horrified to see the severity of the burns on the girl's knees and legs. Fortunately, as is usually the case, there always seems to be at least one doctor on every flight. However, despite a physician being on board, and he did come to the girl's aid, assessing the burns and confirming they were second-degree burns, the doctor said the only available first aid kit on the plane contained a basic over-the-counter burn lotion, which he deemed inadequate for treating such severe injuries. Later on, the victim's grandmother showed a photo of the wounds to the flight attendant, who gasped in horror, but then failed to take any meaningful action. Instead, the flight attendant fetched some chocolates and offered them to the victim. Wow, sounds more like Spirit Airlines, not British Airways. But for the remainder of the flight, the victim cried in pain, but to their surprise, when they arrived in Miami, the airline had failed to have medical personnel waiting at the gate to assess her injuries even further, despite their severity. Unable to walk properly, she had to use a motorized scooter, and her planned trip to Disney World, well, that was canceled due to the pain and discomfort. Nearly 2 years later, the girl still suffers from both physical and emotional scars, with a visible mark on her thigh and knee. The lawsuit claims that British Airways failed to adhere to safety protocols regarding the handling of hot beverages and did not provide the necessary medical support after the injury. Her legal team contends that the airline's neglect directly led to the teenager's prolonged suffering and long-term damage. The case is being filed under Article 17 of the Montreal Convention, an international treaty that holds airlines responsible for passenger injuries on international flights. Normally, claims under the article are capped at around $180,000, but if gross negligence can be proven, the cap can be exceeded. The girl's legal team is seeking over $750,000, arguing that British Airways' actions and inaction were directly responsible for the extent of the injury and its ongoing impact. The girl's legal team is confident that they can demonstrate British Airways' gross negligence in this case, and they seek to hold the airline accountable for the pain and suffering caused by the incident. So as I mentioned, there have been so many similar burn incidents on airlines that are just too numerous to mention. However, let's take a look at just a few of the more pressing cases. And this isn't the first coffee burn lawsuit for British Airways, by the way, either. In 2020, a 15-month-old child on a Lufthansa flight was scalded when a flight attendant accidentally spilled a cup of hot coffee on her during a flight from Germany to the U.S. The child suffered second-degree burns on her chest and shoulder. The family filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court. The case raised questions about liability under international aviation law, specifically the Montreal Convention. Lufthansa attempted to have the case dismissed under jurisdictional claims. However, a U.S. judge allowed the case to proceed. The case was eventually settled out of court. In 2014, Air Canada was sued over a burn incident. In that case, a woman was burned when a flight attendant spilt a cup of hot coffee on her. The burns were so severe that they required skin grafts. In that case, the plaintiff again argued that Air Canada was responsible under the Montreal Convention for injuries caused by accidents on international flights. Eventually, this case, too, was settled out of court. 2018, a 13-year-old girl on Aer Lingus was scolded by hot chocolate. Her family sued and were awarded 20,000 euros. 2023, on Vestaria Airlines, a 10-year-old girl received second-degree burns when she was burned by hot chocolate. The airline did, however, provide immediate first aid and arrange for medical care upon landing. But the airline argued that the child was playful during service, but the family alleged negligence and sued the airlines, and that too was settled out of court. 2022 Ryanair flight, an 8-year-old girl was scalded by hot tea when a flight attendant allegedly failed to secure the lid on the cup during a Ryanair flight from Venice to London. In that case, the court approved a payout of £3,500 to the family. And the list go on, but you get the idea. However, for these incidents to continue to happen after decades of similar incidents can only be attributed to some real carelessness by the airlines. Especially that in considering the response to such incidents, airlines have already implemented various safety measures, such as ensuring that hot beverages are served with secure lids to prevent spills, training flight attendants to handle hot liquids carefully, and respond promptly to spills and modifying beverage service during turbulence or when the passengers are moving around. So, where were all these safety procedures on British Airways? Well, I guess that's the $750,000 question. Still, every time there's a lawsuit about the same situation with somebody being burned by a hot beverage on a plane, the first move for every airline to do is blame the passenger. If they can't blame the passenger, they blame the weather or they blame the plane. But then when you have evidence like this, and there have been a lot of cases with similar evidence, airlines have no choice but to pay up. So you would think they would learn by now to take precautions ahead of time and not have to pay up. But, that's how they do it. So anyway, I look forward to hearing your thoughts down below. Let me know down below, have you experienced such things? Have you seen such things while flying? I won't know until you let me know down below. Until next time, this is Maximus.